Are we ready? All right, good morning, everyone. And thank you for being here. Today, in recognition of Women's History Month and Equal Pay Day tomorrow, we are announcing two measures that will make our city and our workplaces more equitable and safer, especially for women. I'm joined today by a number of folks, but I'll call out Department of Human Resources Commissioner Chris Owens, Budget Director Susie Park, AIS Commissioner Sandra Blakemore, and members of the Mayor's Women's Advisory Council, and members of my Gender-Based Violence Task Force as well as advocates who fight for gender equity every single day and have been in lockstep with us throughout this administration. In thinking about today's announcement, I can't help but reflect on my own career path. Throughout my work as a federal prosecutor, an attorney, and as the president of Chicago Police Board, I often had found that I was the only woman in many of the rooms in which I was in. And more often, I was the only person of color or only black person in those rooms. And even now as mayor, I'm Chicago's first ever openly gay black woman mayor. And while I'm proud that I've been able to push through barriers and earn a seat at these tables, it certainly wasn't without challenges. And it wasn't free of discrimination or harassment. And though I've come a long way to open up opportunities for women and safeguard their paths in this city, there remains a lot more work to do. The lessons that I've learned throughout my career empower my work as mayor and create safer and more equitable workplaces and communities across Chicago. I envision a city where young women, regardless of their race, ethnicity, age, or socioeconomic status, can reach any career aspiration that they dream of. I want my daughter's generation to be free of the barriers that have held too many of us back. That brings us to today's announcement. In recognition of tomorrow, March 14th, being Equal Pay Day, I'm proud to sign a pay equity executive order which requires the Department of Human Resources, Budget, and AIS departments to conduct a pay equity audit every 2 years. Across the country, it's estimated that women continue to make just 77 cents for every dollar that a white male makes. The data is even worse for black women, earning 64 cents on the dollar, and Latina women earning just 54 cents on the dollar. This new pay equity audit seeks to better understand what, if any, discrepancies exist within the city of Chicago's workforce related to gender, race, and ethnicity. I'm a firm believer that we have to lead by example. This executive order builds upon similar efforts to make city government more transparent and equitable, such as our employee diversity dashboard, which serves as a data-driven tool to increase diversity inclusion within city departments and hold ourselves accountable by being as transparent as we possibly can be. The results of our pay equity audit, happening every 2 years, will be made public to further hold the city accountable in our work to achieve equity and inclusion. And as I sign this executive order, I want to call upon Chicago's private sector and sister agencies to take a closer look at their workforces as well, and as necessary, follow suit. It's not enough to talk about equity. It's certainly not enough to post on social media tomorrow about Equal Pay Day. If we all take intentional steps to recognize, reaffirm, and value our women employees, then we can create a city that is not only more equitable but successful, because women, as we know, get stuff done. As we work to build that more equitable and successful city, we must also work to make our city safer for all kinds of violence, domestic, sexual, and gender-based violence. To that end, I'm also proud to announce today a new partnership with Futures Without Violence to develop a robust, tailored, and intentional training program on gender-based violence and harassment in a workplace. This citywide training program will launch this month, mandating multi-day training for all commissioners to ensure that our workplaces are responsive to domestic and sexual violence. The The goals of this training program are to ensure that city government realizes the impacts of trauma related to gender-based violence, recognize the elements of trauma and how they may manifest themselves in the everyday workplace and our communities, and to respond to any staff or residents who are experiencing violence with survivor-centered approaches that foster safety, stability, and well-being. This training program aligns with our administration's policies and efforts to resist practices that are re-traumatizing survivors and those impacted by gender-based violence to ensure that every city employee can thrive in a workplace and productive work environment. I'm proud to say that this will be the largest and most comprehensive training offered to municipal governments in the country, enhancing Chicago's reputation as a welcoming, inclusive, and equitable city. That is thanks in part to focus groups who helped to inform our training, and especially thanks to Futures Without Violence and their Workplaces Respond to Domestic Violence and Sexual Violence National Resource Center. This training program builds upon our citywide strategic plan to address gender-based violence and human trafficking, and our city's first ever whole-of-government approach to address these issues and their intersections at racism and gender inequality. As one of the city's largest employers, the City of Chicago has a responsibility to increase our capacity and our knowledge to address gender-based violence in all of its forms and manifestations. We've taken historic steps to achieve both of these goals throughout my term, particularly within this past year, and let me give you a couple of examples. The city's new and expanded parental leave policy went into effect in January of this year, offering 12 weeks of paid parental leave to city employees, regardless of whether they are a birthing or non-birthing parent, and regardless of whether or not they're growing their families through adoption, foster care, as well as those acting as a surrogate. With this new policy, Chicago became one of the largest cities in the Midwest and across the country to have such a progressive and innovative policy. Furthermore, this policy accomplishes several goals. One thing, it goes towards our public health goals to close racial disparities in maternal and infant health outcomes. It also ensures that city employees receive the wages that they are entitled to, regardless of their birthing status, race, gender, or ethnicity, and ensuring that Chicago is continually equitable. Further, it establishes Chicago as an ideal city for working families to live. I'm incredibly proud of what we've done on these and other fronts, and I'm grateful for all the support that we've received from all of you. From all the members of our gender-based violence task force, all the work and support and holding us accountable for our women's advisory community, and all of the great people across the city government and the city of Chicago. We have work to do, but we are making big, bold steps to make sure that that happens. It's now my pleasure to welcome up Sharita Allens, the President and CEO of Women Employed. Sharita.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hi, my name is Sharita Allens. I am the President and CEO of Women Employed. For the past 50 years, Women Employed has been working to advance equity for women in the workplace. We are focused on growing the economic power of women and ensuring workplaces where women can thrive. We are pleased to see the City of Chicago prioritizing equity for the women in their workplace. Women continue to face significant barriers to economic equity and justice. We continue to be negatively impacted by the persistent pay gap that you heard the mayor speak of earlier. We disproportionately shoulder the weight of caregiving, including lost wages and long-term care, which impacts our careers. We are still, very unfortunately, experiencing sexual harassment and assault at high rates, leading many of us to leave jobs to secure our physical and mental health and well-being. And due to the intersection of gender and racial bias, all of these disparities and barriers are amplified for Black and brown women. Based on the current wage gap that you hear everyone talk about, without meaningful intervention, women overall will lose approximately $400,000 over the course of a 40-year career. Compared to white, non-Hispanic men, for Latinas, this career loss amounts to $1.2 million over 40 years. And for Black women, the losses are over $900,000 in a 40-year career. So it's important not just to talk about the percentages in the gap. It's important that we recognize what this impact means to our households, to our bank accounts, to our pockets. Multiple surveys show how women experience sexual harassment during their lives, and 80% of women who have been harassed leave their jobs within 2 years. Research Women Employed released just last year reveals that survivors of gender-based violence in Chicago need and want support from their workplaces to chart a pathway to economic independence that is crucial to safety. While sexual harassment prevention in the workplace has seen significant changes in the 21st century, the wage gap has not. It's pretty much stalled. Tomorrow's Equal Pay Day, an annual day to build awareness and express our collective disbelief and rage, and because the rate of, to express that, and because the rate of change has pretty much stalled, it should really serve as a reminder that we must all take action to interrupt this systemic issue that's causing harm to our economy, to our communities, and to our households. And it is my belief that the role of employers is equally as important as policy. As employers, we have a key responsibility in dismantling systemic barriers and must enact workplace policies that prioritize equity. Because the effects are intersectional, that requires interconnected policies focused on addressing those with the greatest needs. Women Employed applauds these 3 highly impactful measures enacted by the City of Chicago. Conducting and publicizing pay equity audits is one of the best ways to close the internal pay gaps. By training all employees on gender-based violence and harassment, the city is building a culture of prevention, safety, and support for survivors. And by extending parental leave to all city workers for up to 12 weeks, more working parents will remain financially secure. Just as importantly, the city is once again, leading the way as one of Chicago's largest employers and setting an example for other employers to follow. For Chicago to be a destination for working families, we urge other employers to incorporate these best practices whenever possible. We look forward to continuing to partner with the City of Chicago and striving for gender equity and justice. And we eagerly anticipate creating safer, more sustainable working environments where women can not just survive, but we thrive. Thank you for your time today, and I am going to bring up Commissioner Christopher Owen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharita. The City of Chicago has been committed for years to ensuring that we provide, through our HR policies and practices, an equitable workplace. And as one of the largest employers in the city, with approximately 32,000 employees, we take that commitment very seriously. That's why, as the mayor noted, we've taken steps to instill equity into our HR practices, like we did last month with a revised background check policy, and earlier this year when we expanded paid parental leave to 12 weeks for all employees regardless of birthing status. We're also working with the Chicago Therapy Collective in honor of the legacy of Elise Mallory to evaluate and develop trans-inclusive employment practices within city government. These changes and partnerships continue to make the City of Chicago a progressive leader among governments nationwide. We've also committed to be transparent about our workforce equity progress as well as where we are falling short as demonstrated in our public employee diversity dashboard. Despite the steps that we've taken, we know that there is still work to be done, that pay gaps persist across the labor market, and that people still experience harassment and violence in their workplace. So I am proud today to announce these actions with Mayor Lightfoot. The biannual pay equity audit will give the Department of Human Resources the tools and data that are necessary to identify where we still have work to do and where to take action to ensure that there are no discrepancies in pay by gender, race, or ethnicity for our employees who serve the City of Chicago. I'm also eager for our partnership with Futures Without Violence, through which we will take steps to make sure our employees are safe and free from violence or harassment while at work, and that they center those best practices in how they fulfill their duties and serve the residents of Chicago. This initiative epitomizes what it means to take a whole-of-government approach, the broad goal of the mayor's citywide strategic plan to address gender-based violence and human trafficking. I'd like to thank Mayor Lightfoot for your leadership on these critical issues, as well as the many advocates and partners who have helped us in this effort. And now I'd like to introduce Isabel Dobel, Deputy Director at the Chicago Federation of Labor.
Hello, my name is Isabel Dobel. I go by Izzy. I'm the Deputy Director of Government Affairs for the Chicago Federation of Labor and a 2022 Trabajadoras Fellow for the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement. Thank you to Mayor Lightfoot for bringing us here today and for working to make the workplace a place of belonging, value, and respect for people of all genders. Tomorrow is Women's Pay Day, as we've mentioned, which is when a woman finally makes the same as a white man in the same role from the previous year. This is because for every $1 a man makes, a woman makes only 84 cents in some estimates. So a woman has to work almost a year and 3 months to make the same amount of money a man does in 1 year. This is a frustrating fact because women make up nearly 50% of the workforce, yet are compensated less and given less opportunities to access the same high-paying jobs. The pay gap is deeper and much later in the year for people with intersectional identities, such as Black women, who only make 67 cents per dollar per estimate, Latina women who make only 57 cents, and Indigenous women who make 51 cents. This is telling women that they need to work twice as long to get just as far. The gap impacts all of us, the women in our lives and their families. This fight is personal to me and my family as an immigrant, a woman, and the youngest of 4 sisters. For the labor movement, the fight to close the pay gap and access to quality jobs is inherent in what we do. Labor unions fight to ensure workers are paid prevailing wages, supported in their workplace, and into retirement. And do you know what the #1 way to close the gender pay gap is? Joining a union. Women make 22% more if they join a union. Union women are more likely to have paid leave and stronger protections against discrimination and sexual harassment in the workplace. As the CFL, we appreciate the work that the administration is doing to take pay parity a step further and not only make government salaries public, but require that disparities are clear and public. Gone are the days that we are scared to ask about wages or salary with our coworkers. Women deserve to have this information at their fingertips. We commend the mayor for increasing compensation visibility and instituting gender-based violence training to improve the workplace for all of the women in Chicago. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eden. All right, it's official. All right, thank you, everyone.
Any chance for a question?
Not today.
On topic. I just wonder about that. If you have the biannual, does that mean that the city will be committed to make sure that the pay is always, it's nice to have a study.
Yeah.
But how do you make sure that the pay is equal?
Well, we've got to do it in a couple of ways. Number one is we've got to make sure that in a way in which we're recruiting people, that we're conscious of the fact that we've got to have women, people of color, all of the things that make up a good, strong, diverse workforce, that they that there's a consciousness and intentionality on the front end. And then that we're not, frankly, pigeonholing women into lower paid jobs. We spent a lot of time in the most recent round of labor negotiations, frankly, addressing a number of these things, and frankly, eliminating titles that were outdated, but also, frankly, were just traps for women in lower wage jobs that don't give them, frankly, sufficient income to be able to take care of their families. So really, fundamentally, it's all about intentionality. Why this audit, I think, is so important is because it will be a public measuring stick of whether or not we're making progress. And all the people here, right, who have worked long and hard and continue to make sure that women have equity in the workforce, they can hold this administration and every future administration accountable for the goals and the standards that we have set to make sure that we're meeting those standards. So the best way to make sure that we're accountable and making progress is being transparent, and these equity audits, I think, are going to be a critical part of that future.
Thank you,
All right.
Mayor. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great question. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mayor.
I'll let you have one more on topic.
Is there specific city departments that you think are especially, that there's especially wide gap and we'd like to hire more women into those well-paid jobs?
Well, look, I think as you heard from Izzy from the CFL, we've got to make sure that there are more women in the trades. Those are the highest paying jobs. They've got great benefits, but that has not been a traditional path or course for women. So we will continue to make sure that we are pressing all the trades, but also working in partnership with them. We can't wag our finger at them and say, you need to do better. We've got to work in partnership with them to develop pathways so that women have access to the training and the apprenticeship to be able to take on those jobs. Look, we know this. Through this latest recessionary period, women were hit very hard, having to go home and homeschool, in effect, their children. And it's been, I think, tougher for women to return to the workplace as a consequence of that. But we've got to make sure that every good, high-paying job that women have access to, but also outside of the city government, making sure that we continue to highlight those jobs that are the ones that are traditionally held by women. Why do we care so much, for example, about the fair scheduling ordinance, right? That didn't affect specifically city workers, but it affected women in those lower wage jobs to have predictability around what their schedule was going to be. If they had to work multiple jobs, they would know then on a regular basis what their cash flow was going to be, what they needed to do to take care of their children in terms of childcare. These are all building blocks to creating more opportunity, more wealth, and more support for women. Because if women are successful in the workplace, their children are successful, their families are successful. So all of these things make a huge difference. But that's, I think, one of the most important ways that we get this done. All right, thank you all. Congratulations.